Welcome back to another episode of the Pinpoint Investor with Faisal Morsi. Today I have my friend Diana Khan on. She is a lawyer. I think she owns like 7 to 10 businesses by now, probably. And she's just all around beast. Thank you for coming on, Diana.
Thanks for having me. So I think I made this joke right before you went live, but I'm sitting in my car. I'm trying to impersonate you because every time I ask you for a video or an endorsement or anything, you're always sitting in your car. So I now am you.
I like to think of it like my mobile office. So, I'm
There you
very
go.
versatile in that regard.
Yay. You know
Um,
what? Often imitated, never duplicated. That's what you should say.
it's like the highest form of flattery, right?
Yeah.
All right. So give me an idea. Like, what do you do, and how did you get to where you are?
So I do everything. No. I own a law firm where we do a lot of like wealth build it outs for investors. So people like you who buy houses, a lot of the time they work with lawyers only when things go bad. So I'm actually trying to reinvent that tool to be a law firm that you call prior to things going back, looking at your innovation agreements, looking at your situation. If you're buying a property that needs probate, I'm your girl. I won't charge you right up front and I'll make money off the back end. So I was a realtor before this. So I market like a realtor, but I'm a lawyer and it's working very well for me. And that's kind of my primary bread and butter. I own 2 real estate brokerages as well, where most of my investors hang their hat when they're done paying money to like third party brokerages. I own a title company because why give the business to somebody else if my investors are using me for everything else? And also construction. I affiliate with Ryan Greenberg for construction, and we also do property management. So pretty much one hat across the board. And we are now, or at least I am, trying to start going on more nationwide speaking on being business savvy when it comes to finances, building out a trust, knowing how to layer yourself. So I don't do much.
Not at all. I'm going to have a shameless plug here. So Diana and I met at an event, and honestly, I met a bunch of people, so I didn't even remember her the next day, which is terrible to say. But she then ordered a bunch of data from me, which was it was an alarming amount to where like normally I have like consultation appointments beforehand, and I got an order through Pinpoint Skip and reached out to her and was like, "Hey, let's have lunch." I think we met like a couple days later, and there was obviously a lot of synergies with our business. So she's been extremely successful with our data, and proud that she's a client of mine. Talk to me more about like your speaking engagements and like what are you doing with that and why?
So I'm very good at speaking. And I think, I'm not that funny. So I think it's really just because I break things down in a simple way. A lot of the time when I talk to lawyers about like trusts and anything that it comes to like building your business or getting squatters out or just even simple things, when you talk to a lawyer, you get lost in this like legal jargon. And I think people hate that. So I sort of started reinventing the way that's done, started picking up the phone call to people who just had a general question without charging an hourly billable. And then I realized that when you make things more human, people want to listen. And what's really authentic is most of the things that I help people do and build out is things that I fucked up myself. I don't know if I should curse,
That's
but
fine.
it's things that I messed up on. So it's successful and I'm good at speaking because I'm very open about the things that I think most people are scared to announce. Like I'm fine with saying, I had postpartum depression and took 2 years off because I couldn't figure out myself. I'm fine with saying things like, hey, you know what? Some days I don't feel like picking up the phone and I lose a big client. And then I can also talk about the other legal aspects. So speaking for me has kind of ingrained into my success because I think people are so thrown off by it because I'm so genuine, or maybe I'm just so unhinged that I started doing it locally, retained like 80% of the room every time I spoke. And now I'm trying to kind of bring it out on more nationwide level to let people know that the vertical integrations I've built out and everything I've sort of created for myself is attainable for anybody. It just, you have to have the tools. And I should be one of those tools alongside with people like you who provide data or people who are more genuine with what they share.
Um, Talk to me about that postpartum phase because that's something I didn't know about you, and I think it's a vulnerability, something that like would resonate with a lot of people. So, what was that like, and how did you manage to get out of it? Especially while trying to like manage your family along with manage everything else that you have going on in your businesses.
So, it's weird because I have three young kids and they're very close in age. They're like 2 years apart. And I didn't know I had postpartum depression. I had no clue. I don't think I realized how bad I was until I had my second kid, um, because I just thought it was normal. But I remember like I would get nervous that he couldn't breathe at night and I wouldn't be able to sleep. And, my husband and I were fighting a lot. And I just thought all these things were pretty normal. But I had a very horrible birth and I almost died. I lost like 6 pints of blood. And then it took me a year to physically recover. Um, and I didn't know how much anxiety I had and how much depression I had until I had my second. And I sort of realized, like, oh, this is how it feels. And then I want to say that, like, I had postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety, but I think as women, which I'm sure you can't relate to as much, but I think as women, we need to reinvent the idea that, oh, I had postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety. I think it's just we change as humans and we try to accommodate what we should be doing, and there's not a lot of flexibility in who we are. And I think every woman that gives birth goes through postpartum depression, but I don't think it's postpartum depression. I think it's just we don't have a better word for it yet. It's a transition period that some people are more adaptable to and some aren't. And I had no idea how badly I was until, my second was born, and then I didn't have the anxiety, was able to sleep. Like I didn't really see myself the first birth I had until a year in.
What's your relationship like with your mom, and were you able to lean on her during this time?
No, 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 no. So my mom, you know, it's funny. I had a good relationship with my mom up till the birth of my third, but I think it was the version of good relationship that you're told you have with your parents, and I didn't realize how dysfunctional it was. Um, I love my mom. I think they did the best they could. It's just that it was when I had kids, I became into the realization of how much you could do the best you can and still not have done what is right for somebody else. And my mom is very big on, like, you could be a lawyer, you could be a doctor. And it was very academic. And we're not originally from here. It's very culturally different. So when I had a kid, I felt very overwhelmed when she was there. And I couldn't really talk about things like postpartum depression or anxiety or anything like that. And then when my third was born, which is my daughter, she was born 2 years ago. And somewhere between my first and my third, I started practicing boundaries with my mom and started kind of discovering, again, my parents did the best they could and we had a good relationship. But just, I started realizing how much stuff there was to unpack there when I had my own kids. And when my youngest was born, my mom went to Cancun. It was the height of COVID. And she goes to Cancun. I had like a 2 week old baby, a 4 year old and a 2 year old. And she came back and she was very sick. She was incredibly sick. She had a fever of 104. When I tell people I came back from Cancun and I had a fever and they let me on the plane in the height of COVID, I lawyered my way onto that plane. My mom, though, like, I'm sure she crazied her way onto that plane. So she gets back, she's not feeling well, and my son was having his fifth birthday party that Sunday. So normally my relationship with my mom prior to my kids, I would have like dropped everything, gone to make sure she was okay. Those of you who maybe are not from the US, you know how important it is to sort of like drop and run and help your parents. But I was practicing boundaries. So I told her to go get a COVID test. I'll see you in a couple days. And she just kept getting worse. And she was being very stubborn about going to the hospital. And then by Wednesday, she had collapsed and she was on the floor for 14 hours at home.
Oh, wow.
And yep. And I got a phone call from my dad, and he said, your mom's fine. She doesn't need to go to the hospital. I know you guys talked about it, but she said she doesn't feel anything, so she's good. But she fell on the floor and she's been down there for about 13 hours. She's having trouble getting up. Can you send your husband over here? And I was like, absolutely. Hung up, called 911. And 911 gets there. My mom refuses care. And they pick her up off the floor. They put her on the side. And at that point, she was not herself. And it took another 6 hours and her collapsing on the floor again for me to call 911 a second time. And she ended up refusing care a second time. And that's when I had to lie to the EMTs that took her and say that I was her POA, her power of attorney, She didn't have any of her documents in order. So she goes to the hospital. Thursday morning, I get a phone call from the ICU. She's dying. We need to say our goodbyes. Septic shock, total organ failure. We don't know why. And she was at Northwest Hospital in Baltimore County. And so I called my brother. He came down from New York. I called my dad. I had to call on my family because none of them speak English. And we started saying our goodbyes. And, I had sort of like adapted myself from the time I had my first with postpartum to the third, where I'm going to do things right and I'm not going to let like my relationships interfere. So I was sitting there in the hospital with like, if only I'd gone to her house on Monday, she might have survived this. And there was just a lot of grief. And she septic shock, total organ failure. They told us she was going to die. And then by Saturday, we were sort of just kind of waiting for it to happen. And a fellow came up to us and said, "It's my belief your mom doesn't have to die today. I think that the hospital is not diagnosing her right. So you need to get her switched to another hospital at shock trauma in Baltimore City." And my mom didn't have any of her stuff in order. So I went downstairs. I took out $5,000 from the ATM, which was the max that could be taken out. I went up to a nurse in the ICU and said that she was going to watch my mom sign a bunch of legal documents, which I write for other people. And she goes, "That's illegal. I can't do that." And I was like, okay, well, it's going to happen or I'm going to go to jail, one or the other. We flew my mom to shock trauma because she did sign those docs. And in shock trauma, they told us that she had a flesh-eating, skin-eating bacteria that she'd gotten from Cancun. And it had traveled from her knee all the way up to her thigh. It was Super Bowl Sunday. My mom had dementia-like symptoms. She didn't know who I was. And doctor called me and said, "Amputation or death, which would you like to choose?" And I chose amputation. And I called my brother and I said, if she survives this, she will never speak to us again if they end up amputating her leg. So since that day, you asked me how my relationship with my mom is. It's evolved. Evolved is a good word. Happy to say she's alive. She has her leg. That was one of 9 surgeries. She was in the
So she
ICU for
had
7.
her leg.
Yep. They did not
Okay.
amputate. She had 7 or 8 other surgeries, maybe 9 after that one, where amputation was on the floor for each one of them. Then we did subacute care and acute care. And my daughter, I stopped breastfeeding because I couldn't do that postpartum while also going to the ICU. And there was, there was a formula shortage and there was just a lot. And I talk about that because my mom, once she started getting better, she didn't want to do what I thought was best for her. And normally, I guess, again, not growing up here, I normally would say, okay, sure, we'll do it your way. But that was a breaking point for me where I sort of was like, okay, well, we're going to stop talking and I'm going to find a way to like be okay with your decisions and be who I am. So my mom and I actually stopped talking while she was in the ICU for a couple months while I sort of figured out how I could watch her make life decisions and not ingrain my identity to caring for her. So we're friends now. We talk all the time now. But it was definitely like postpartum and those couple years after were quite a lot. A lot.
And so, I mean, I'm a child of immigrants as well. I do understand that cultural gap. What is your relationship like with your dad? And same thing. Like, has it evolved through this process? And I don't know, for because I know you, like I understand that. Like, I think that you are extremely successful and driven because of your relationship with your parents, but I don't know which parent it is that drove you to your insanity.
My mom, definitely. My mom,
Okay.
definitely. My brother is a surgeon in this country, and he's one of 3 or 4 in the country that do what he does.
Uh,
And so my mom was all about academics. We weren't about emotional development. It wasn't about much other stuff. It was about academics. Even when my husband asked my mom for my hand in marriage, he said, "You better make sure she goes to law school."
nice.
So that gives you a lot. My dad and I are okay. My dad is 10 years older than my mom, and he's aged very, like, quite a lot since my mom got sick. It was a tough transition because I've always been a daddy's girl, and like my dad could do no wrong. It was my mom and I that always used to fight. And I think in the realization of sort of the extent of my mom and her issues and my issues, and just that, I want to call it childhood trauma, but it's not trauma. Like they did the best they could. It's just the stuff that I held on to. I think I demonized my mom, but never my dad. And then when my mom was sick, there was quite a lot of just differences of opinions and differences of ways to carry that. And I think I sort of hit this like understanding of, in order for me to have a relationship with my dad, I can't dig too deep to take the rose-colored glasses off, because my dad has always been sort of like the perfect one. And then I sort of had this realization of like my belief of my relationship with my dad might be a little different. And I've chosen to sort of leave it on earth because that the shit with my mom was way too much already. So my dad and I are great. My dad has always sort of been a great dad, but a background person. My mom is very driven. She was very successful in her career. Obviously, she pushed my brother and I, and you know, it's rough because I think like she did the best she could, but her relationship with her kids is a little strained because of it. And um, at least for me, I don't know about my brother, but I work on raising my kids a lot different than the way we were raised. I work on giving my kids the coping skills that they need and believing that they are who they are. And education or being smart doesn't really, like me pushing them to do education is not really going to be the end all be all. It's our job is to just give coping mechanisms to our kids as best as we can.
Was your mom a stay-at-home mom, or did she work?
She worked. She worked. She was a top tier doctor in Bulgaria. And when I was, I think, two, she flew to America and left me with my dad for a year while she like pursued her career. And listen, all power to her. I mean, I'm in America because of that, right? Like she had, we came from a country that was not recognized in anything, and she got a visa to get here. So her hard work led to my upbringing and me having a very fortunate life. So good for her. And, I didn't have a bad childhood at any means. Just, I think all of us as adults kind of look through and take the glasses off and sort of realize what was good, what wasn't, even if your parents did best for you, and which part of your postpartum depression might play into that.
So she left you guys left you at the age of 2. How old was your brother?
So my brother's 13 years older than me.
Okay.
He's my stepbrother, and she had a previous marriage. And from what I've heard, she left him home unattended as a baby to pursue her career.
Oh.
And the neighbors checked in on her.
Do you have any other
On her.
siblings?
Nope, just us
Okay,
two.
just you two. So left him, you went and pursued your career, and then you came here. How old?
I was eight, eight.
Okay. And so did she go back like after that year? Did she go back to Bulgaria, and like what did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, she traveled quite a lot. I mean, my mom was, she's very traveled in her career, and then eventually when we got here, we're I think the typical immigration story. My mom came here on a work visa. We overstayed it. We became illegals for a little bit. So then we couldn't go back because if we'd gone back, we'd never come. And then my brother stayed in Bulgaria to get his medical degree, came here on a green card visa, which is a thing, like a green card lotto ticket. And eventually, when we got her citizenship in order, she's gone back. I think she plans to go back in a couple weeks. So most of our family is there, and we try to travel quite often.
Nice. What did your dad do growing up?
My dad was an economist, and then in Bulgaria, and then when we moved here, he was a delivery driver. And that's, I grew up pretty much in poverty. Again, my parents put me in the best schools in the best district and smallest house. They did whatever they could, but they definitely gave up and sacrificed a lot to give us that.
The American dream. All right. And so what would you say like drives you now? Because I know like for everything that you do, I don't understand how you have the time and the capacity to do everything you do. So what drives you?
I think it's just my kids, right? Like my parents did so much for me, and I'm very lucky in everything they did. But one of the things that like I don't have a good memory of is having good memories with my family. Like my mom was always working. We were poor, so there was quite a lot of like, how do we make ends meet and all that stuff. So for me, I A, don't want my kids to ever feel that, and B, I'm 35, and I hope by the age of 45 I will be at a place where I'm all the vertical businesses that I have are growing enough income for me so that I don't have to worry about providing for my kids and I can spend time with them and all of that. So I'm very protective of the time I do spend with them now. And it drives me to sort of make sure that they have better than I did growing up.
Do you feel that you are sacrificing your like time or relationship with your kids now for that dream?
Um, in the last year, yeah, because I've sort of really blown up in the last year. So I've definitely, before that, I think they wouldn't have known if I'd had a job. I think I was very good at sort of making it seem like I was always there for them. In the last year, I've sort of hit this trajectory of like an up, right? So I definitely feel like I'm sacrificing more, but people will tell you they're only young ones. But in my opinion, it's like, yeah, but if I'm building it out and it's just a year of a small time frame where I'm building out something better so they could have that availability, then sure. So yes, it is a sacrifice. And I do tell at least the staff that work for me, I always tell them everything's a sacrifice, whether or not it's a child or something else. If I'm working, I'm sacrificing something. And if I'm with my kids, I'm sacrificing work. Like, I think the train of success is that you have to know you can't do it all. And no matter what you're doing in that moment, you're sacrificing another issue. So when you are, I think, climbing as fast as I am, I guess I would put it that way, you have to sort of know what your boundaries are and be very, very careful of them. So for me, if you work with my law firm and you call me between 3 and 6 or 7 o'clock, I'm not working. Like that's the time, that's the 3 hours I get with my kids. I will schedule calls with clients at 8 o'clock at night because my kids go down at 7 and I am on the phone from 7 o'clock to 10 p.m. because I didn't work 3 to 7 or whatever it is. And my staff always think that's weird, but it's how I've built it. And, I have staff members who will not bother me all day because they know I'm working, but they will work at 10 o'clock at night to ask all the questions that they missed that day. And I used to feel guilty. I'm like, that's not a traditional job. Like they should have a life. And then I was like, you know what? I pay them really well and they could choose to work here or they don't. And they sort of know the expectation that when I'm with my kids, I'm with my kids. You don't bother me. If you want to catch up later, you can catch up in the morning or in the evening, but like that's my work hours and that's when you're going to do it.
Yeah, I can attest to you working late nights. I think you and I have been on calls at like 10, 11 o'clock at night. So you are nuts when it comes to that, but I support you. So what does the 10 term or the 10-year vision look like for you? Like where are you going to be in 10 years? And how do your businesses look?
So I'm very passionate on helping others pivot and lean into what they want to do. And I don't want to call that coaching because I don't think it's coaching. I think coaching has a bad rap, but I would hope that I've built these businesses to a degree where I can bring clients in, help people systematically use the services because they do have quite a lot of businesses that they've built up passive income for me. But in the 10-year plan, if I was to pivot into something I really enjoy, I want to have enough residential and commercial buildings that are my own, and then also enough income sort of being produced by the staff that I've built that I can focus on helping others use their life as a stepping stone to lean into a little bit of discomfort or lean into a lot of discomfort to become successful. All of us can do it. I just think we need to be more open with who we are. So I'm hoping that in 10 years from now, I have enough residual income that I don't have to work, but if I am working, it's talking to people and helping them get where they need to be and helping them accomplish what I've accomplished so far and will in the next 10 years.
You're never not going to work. I know you.
No. Mm-mm.
All right. Out of all your businesses, like which one's your favorite?
I think my law firm is my favorite. I really, really enjoy the fact that nothing's the same. And most people think that when you're doing law, you're just, you're suing people, you're yelling at people. But what makes my law firm very different is one of the things I say on consults all the time is the law says X, whatever X may mean. Let's say in this example, I'm saying divorces, right? I'll talk to a woman and she's like, well, 4 lawyers told me that I can get alimony and I can get child support and I can do all these things. And I usually tell people, yes, that's what the law says. However, don't use a lawyer who's going to sit behind a desk and tell you what the law says, because at the end of the day, I'm still going to be sitting behind this desk tomorrow. If you have a narcissist husband or you have a narcissist ex and you make a decision that sides with you on the law, I'm done with you when you finish paying me and when this divorce is over. But that person is in your life for the next 18 years. And if they're a narcissist or they're abusive, it might not be the best turn of action for you to, get alimony. And a lot of my law firm is almost like a therapy session too, because I work really hard with my clients to not just tell them what to do just because I know it needs to be done, but also work towards, again, leaning into their own life, which I think most lawyers don't. I think most lawyers just tell you what you should do. Whereas I think you can attest to this too. Sometimes I'll say, like, is it worth it, $500 or $600 worth the sacrifice of your children or your mental health to like hire me to fight this out versus, what is realistic and what's not. And I'm very bottom line with a lot of stuff. I don't waste time in telling people what they should do just to make money. And I really enjoy that because I think people talk to me and they find me a little abrasive and a little unhinged, but it's what's driving the success. And I really enjoy it.
Oh, you're definitely abrasive and unhinged. But yeah, I think that's what makes you a good lawyer, and I think that's also what resonates with people. So with the whole like the law firm being like your favorite thing to do or whatever, why now try to also build the speaking engagement stuff? Is it for to build your law firm?
No, so, you know, I enjoy the law firm, but what I enjoy most is my relationships with the people I meet. And when I talk to people, I am very honest and I'm like I say what's on my mind. I try to help people in every capacity that I can, even if it means pro bono. And I find that when I speak to groups of people or when I speak in general, I think I'm just being myself. But people have come up to me and they've said that I said something that stuck with them. Or, in the last 3 days, actually, I've had like six people tell me because I had a talk I did yesterday where like something I said really stuck with them. And it feels good. Whereas I enjoy law when I speak and I like meet people, it doesn't feel like work at all. It just feels like I can't even tell you what I talk about sometimes. I'll stand up there for like an hour and then when I'm done, people are coming up to me and it's not even work. It just kind of comes out naturally. So I feel like I haven't really leaned into that to see kind of where it goes. And maybe a year from now, I'm not doing talks on trust and I'm not doing talks to realtors, or maybe I find that I hate it. But right now, that's the part where I feel at home and it feels right. So I want to kind of pursue it more. I have sort of considered, do I do trust availabilities and like, do I build a system that allows me to provide things on a nationwide level? So I'm kind of exploring that right now with a couple of business partners is like, what does it look like if I talk to a room of people in, Texas, or what does it look like, where do we get those businesses? And I think that's where we see these masterminds and where we see all these like, you pay to play with people like us. And I'm trying to find a way that feels more genuine to who I am. So it's not just like a cash producing thing, and that people will get the most benefit out of hearing my story or hearing who I am and listening to me speak.
You talked about systems, and so I've seen your growth over the past year. It's pretty much been, I mean, in my eyes, at least like a 10x growth. So how are you able to like build your businesses in a way where you're not overwhelmed and your staff isn't overwhelmed?
I think it's just, again, it's boundaries is a big thing for me. I used to think, at least in business, before I became very successful, I used to be like, well, if somebody does X, why aren't, I had a business partner, for example, and we've been business partners for 10 years. And when he did something that would hurt me financially, or when he made a decision, I would make excuses for who he was. Like, that's just him. He's not thinking about me. Or, it's not personal. And in the last year, I've had to sort of realize that as you grow, you have to realize the business and friendship are very different. And for me, the big, I think, part of that is allowing first my employees to lean into their what they're good at and sort of not sticking to people are your friends and people are just blur the lines where you can, figure out what people are good at and then lean into it. So my business partner who, over the years has done a lot of stuff, every time he did something, I used to say, why am I not good enough? Or why does he treat me this way? And the last year, I sort of practiced more of just saying what's on my mind in a positive way. So he did something really recently to me. Again, not, he didn't mean to hurt me, but that's essentially what happened. And, the big thing for me was I texted him and I said, I'm not really comfortable the way this ended. I I really think it's best we part ways. And, we're friends and I don't like the way this feels. And let's just stay friends. And I need you to move away from our brokerage. And I think the big difference is a year ago, I would have sat with that for like 5, 6 days and felt guilty and sort of felt bad. And now I just moved on with my day. Like I was like, it's not personal, it's a business decision. So while we blur the lines, we also have to realize that not everything is going to work and you have to know when to cut that line. And I guess the second part is the 90-day rule, which I've sort of come up with. And I think I've talked to you a little bit about is try everything for 90 days. If you have the financial means to do it, try it for 90 days. And I extend that onto my employees. So none of my employees fit the mold because we're not traditional. Like if an employee says, I want to do X, I give them 90 days. Go run with it. I like this idea. And it really helps my growth because the people who work for me relieve me from having to come up with ideas that I never would have come up on my own and never been successful at because I'm just sort of letting them lean into what they're good at.
Got it. That's a good idea. It's something that I think I need to explore as far as like that 90-day rule. When you're pursuing new partnerships for businesses, like what are you looking for, both strategically and in a partner?
So, right now I just had breakfast with somebody and it was more, they have a huge social media presence. I have a social media presence, right? Like we have enough money, for lack of a better words. So it's more like, how do we grow off of each other to vertically integrate? How can we say thank you to each other? I mean, ultimately, there's enough in every situation for all of us to eat well. And I think for me, the biggest strategy in my life is align yourself with people who want to see you succeed, who are going to say your name in the smallest room and do that back to them, not expecting it. And when you give back to people and you don't expect the same in return, people will give it to you as well. And don't align yourself with people who don't do that, right? Like I think you are one of my biggest endorsers. And you've said the story that I bought your leads and all that, but I don't think I ever did anything with those leads. I think it didn't work for me. I think they're just sitting in my computer, but you've probably, our relationship has given me a 10 times return on that because, you're a small business owner, you were a BRP preferred partner, you were up and coming. I think you yourself have had a lot of growth in the last year. And for me, it wasn't just, let me try this for 90 days and see if it doesn't work. But I could have gone to any skip trace type company and probably gotten something and not been successful at it, right? Your leads are better because for many reasons, but I wasn't in a place where I knew that difference. I could have gone to any company, but I particularly chose you because you were also on the rise and I supported you without meeting you. You didn't know who I was. And your own story is I wanted to grab lunch with her. And you remember that because ultimately, whether or not I fed your kids, a juice box that day because I gave you money or not, I supported another small business and now you give it back every chance you get. And I think that's kind of the strategic business allies that you have to force yourself into is give to people who are going to want to see you succeed. Don't expect it back right away because they might not be able to give it. And that's not why we should be supporting others, but make sure you're aligned with people who will scream your name into an empty room and are not going to count the dollars or cents if you're getting a coffee with them.
People wanting to like hire you and reach out, like are there specific types of cases that you prefer over others or you think like is like your niche?
So anything real estate is my niche because I've been in it for 15 years. So if you are doing a tax lien, if somebody tells you this can't be done, I was told this week that I'm the person you call when everybody tells you there's no solution and I will find it and I'll find it effectively. So if you've got an issue, I'm willing to help you. And again, I think my big thing is I get phone calls from people who are like, I've gone to 4 lawyers and they've all said that this is not going to get done. And I always say, well, I'm willing to try. And if I lose, at least you're still in the same place. So I like the weird. I'm happy with the conversations. I set the right expectations. I mean, I think, not to out you, but I think I just got you paid on something where you didn't have a renter's license on. So, it's a lawsuit where you had a tenant in who owed you quite a lot of money and you didn't have a rental license and we won that. So I like to do the non-traditional. And outside of that, if you are listening to this and you're an investor, which I'm sure most of your listeners probably are, is if you don't have your LLCs and your trusts and all of that set up, that's my niche. I do exactly what you guys do. I have multiple rentals. I have multiple businesses. And I can tell you right now, I sue you as well. So if you're not set up right, I'm the person you want to talk to because I know exactly where to look and I know exactly what to unearth to get you there.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. How do people get a hold of you?
My cell number, you could just shoot me a text, 443-739-6724.
Okay, cool. And then social.
Yep, socials, I'm sure you'll tag me. It's just my first name, last on Facebook, Diana Khan. And then I think Instagram is Dianca underscore Esquire, ESQ.
Okay,
Or
cool.
just look up our business, DK Law.
All right. Appreciate your time today. As always, this is brought to you by Pinpoint Skip. Check out our list at pinpointskip.com. And thanks again for your time. You did all.